This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. So, earlier in this month, Tom Quinn has released some excerpts from his new book that's coming out on February 27th called Yes, Ma'am, The Secret Life of Royal Servants. And in this book, it's supposed to be offering fascinating behind-the-scenes look at life inside the British royal household, as told by past and present palace staff. Packed with historical anecdotes and modern day insights, this book is going to be uncovering surprising royal traditions, humorous staff nicknames for senior royals, and the evolving dynamics within the monarchy. Now, I believe a couple weeks ago, the Times UK had reported a couple of excerpts dropping some bombs around some of the things that were told in this book, such as Meghan being overly friendly with Prince William, as well as Princess Catherine having to manage Prince William's temper tantrums. The book is yet to be released to know what else is being said, but so far it has my interest piqued. So as we wait for this book to come out, I want us to take a look at another book that he wrote called Kensington Palace, an intimate memoir from Queen Mary to Meghan Markle, which was released in 2021. This book delves into the rich history of Kensington Palace, offering readers a behind-the-scenes look at one of Britain's most iconic royal residences. Through exclusive interviews with past and present palace staff, Quinn uncovers intriguing and often scandalous stories that have unfolded within its walls over the past 300 years. The narrative spans from the era of Queen Mary to modern-day experiences of Meghan Markle, providing a comprehensive chronicle of the palace's evolution and its royal inhabitants. This work offers a rare glimpse into the private lives of the royals and the inner workings of the palace, making it a compelling read for those interested in British royal history. Now, I don't think many people talked about this book when it came out in 2021 because not many people were focused on the nefarious activities of these two. I took the opportunity to flip through this book last night and holy cow, we need to talk about a couple things that have been written in this book. So I'm going to go over and highlight some of the things that I didn't know about or heard that I think would be very interesting for you guys to hear. So get comfortable, grab yourself a cozy beverage, hit that like button, and let's begin. So the core foundation of this book is providing this unique, intimate look at the lives of today's young royals and also charts the lives of those who have lived in the palace throughout its history. As the book says in its preface, but this is not a record of what officially went on. It is a history, if you like, of personal relationships. Bland official accounts often skim the surface of troubled lives and difficult relationships. They tone down tales of the mad, the bad, and the dangerous to know. This book does the opposite by looking behind the scenes at the lives and loves of Kensington Palace residents and their servants down the ages, all viewed within the context of an ancient building that has only ever been partly open to the public. In the 17th century, for example, when King William III and his wife Mary lived at Kensington, they got on very badly with Mary's sister Anne, who hated the fact that William and Mary viewed Anne's husband, Prince George of Denmark, as a complete nonentity. They lived together at Kensington Palace and were formally and superficially polite to each other, but it's easy to imagine the tears and tantrums behind the facade. More recently, in an echo of that long-vanished relationship, the sisters-in-law, Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, found themselves caught up in a similarly complex dynamic of kindness mixed with bitterness and jealousies. At Kensington, there's nothing new under the sun. Kensington Palace's history is as much to do with the characters who lived and worked at the palace as it is to do with the bricks and mortar, and this is especially true of the palace's most famous resident, the late Diana, Princess of Wales. Her disastrous marriage to Prince Charles was played out in all its horror at Kensington. The bitterness of that relationship has echoes of other ancient and not-so-ancient royal couplings. These unhappy marriages, based largely on the absurd idea that royals should marry only other royals, or at least aristocrats, have had at least one positive outcome. The royal family has explicitly acknowledged that the world has changed, and that welcoming commoners and divorcees into the family in a way that would have been unimaginable even half a century ago has created a more open institution, which has helped to deflect Republican criticism. Of course, allowing outsiders to marry in also suggests a royal family that is prepared to live dangerously. The divorced, mixed-race Meghan Markle is testament to a remarkably changed world. But then American divorcees, as history teaches us, can lead to royal disasters. Well, ain't that the truth? Perhaps because of the failure of her sister's marriage, Elizabeth II recognized in allowing the marriage of Prince William to the commoner Catherine Middleton that the old ways are not always the best. The old ways destroyed the happiness of Princess Margaret, and she spent decades at Kensington Palace licking her wounds. Now, William and Catherine live at Kensington in a manner that Margaret would perhaps have envied. Not only that, but William and Catherine live in the very same apartment that Princess Margaret and her husband once made their home, although apartment is an absurd word for what is effectively a 4-story house, taking up half a large area of the palace never open to the public, known as Clock Court. Now keep in mind, folks, this book was published in 2021, so I don't believe Catherine and William had moved yet. But the seductive charms of admittance to the royal family, either as servant, courtier, or newlywed, are legion, and what begins as a fairy tale can end, as it did for Margaret, and for the late Diana, Princess of Wales, as a nightmare. A number of people who work at the palace have confirmed that though Catherine Middleton seems remarkably immune so far to the poisonous aspects of life as part of the firm, Meghan Markle, the most recent arrival at Kensington Palace, has not been so lucky. As we will see, the presence of the newest royals, symbols of a modern egalitarianism in the royal family, has led the monarchy away from the old squabbles about precedence and blood relationships, but perhaps into new and perhaps even more difficult territory. In this new territory, the mere fact of being royal is no longer enough. Royals must seem royal, but also have far more of the common touch than they were ever expected to have in the past. Suddenly, finding oneself part of the royal family can have an absurd inflationary effect on the ego. The politician, Sir Henry Chips Channon, summed this up nicely when he said of Wallis Simpson, long before she married Edward VIII, "She already walks into a room as if she's expected to be curtsied to." Social power, it seems, corrupts as much as political and economic power. We gradually move into the modern era and a new and perhaps less stuffy generation of royals that famously includes Catherine Middleton, the first genuine commoner to marry an heir to the throne. Other contenders for the title of first commoner, such as Anne Boleyn, were actually aristocrats. The American divorcee Meghan Markle represents an even more significant move away from the traditions of British royalty. Americans have long married into the British aristocracy. Most famously, perhaps Sir Winston Churchill's mother was an American. But it will be remembered that an American divorcee also caused a king to abdicate. Meghan Markle's arrival at Kensington Palace caused not a few raised eyebrows and internal wrangles that led eventually to her departure for Windsor with husband Prince Harry. More recent developments in the lives of the royal couple and their son have caused a damaging rift, the most damaging in a generation within the royal family. The fact that there was no longer a Tommy Lascelles to rail against royals marrying commoners or divorcees speaks volumes about changes in the royal family and social attitudes in general. But there is a pragmatic element to this. The first consideration for the royal family is survival, and pushing against the tide of egalitarianism is no longer an option in the 21st century. The view at Kensington and Buckingham Palace has been that allowing this generation of young royals to marry commoners will persuade the public that the royal family is aware of the need for change. Meghan and Catherine are also, as it were, a welcome distraction. Since William's marriage and the birth of his 3 children, Kensington has become a hive of public relations effort. as the couple's public relations machine grew. Older royal residents looked on, knowing from their own experience that the younger royals would have to go through difficult times, as John Regan explains. When Princess Margaret lived at Kensington along with Princess Alice, the Kents, and even the dreaded Tommy Lascelles, there were always rows and tensions. Margaret would literally spit on the ground if she caught sight of Lascelles across one of the palace courtyards. And because none of the royal residents were, in reality, as important as members of the immediate family, they were forever squabbling over precedence. But they hated the idea that anyone outside the palace would find out about this. If Margaret was planning to go out, she expected her staff to let other residents know they were not to leave before she did. The other families were just as bad, as they insisted on their place in the pecking order. But everything changed when Diana came to Kensington Palace. She did as she pleased, when she pleased, because of course she could. She was the Princess of Wales and the most important resident apart from her husband. The other residents were either jealous of her or infuriated by what they saw as her refusal to obey the rules they had obeyed for decades. When the adult William arrived with his family, of course it was expected that the arrogant young royals would overreach themselves. By this time, they knew that it was best to keep your head down and not try to control the press. Everyone eventually acknowledges that the Queen's motto, never complain, never explain, is best. But they all believed the younger royals, with their new children and overconfident outlook, would not heed this advice. This has certainly proved to be the case, especially when William and Catherine were joined by Harry and Meghan. At first, the two couples got on well. William and Harry had always been close, but inevitably there were tensions, as one insider explains. Both William and Harry were always likely to be drawn to confident, strong women because they lost their mothers so early. Catherine is actually one of the nicest royals, and she hasn't let life in her extremely grand apartment at Kensington Palace go to her head. Or at least not too much. She is nice to her staff in the main, and she was very warm towards Meghan when she arrived. But tensions were bound to arise because Meghan inevitably had to accept that although she is a duchess, she is not married to the next king. I think she has found that difficult to deal with, and although Harry loved their cottage in the grounds of Kensington Palace, Meghan was conscious that it was tiny in comparison to the vast apartment complex where Catherine and William live. Harry has nothing to prove. Meghan has everything to prove. That's the problem. I know, for example, that tensions reached such a pitch that the Queen herself was driven to Kensington from Buckingham Palace to try to stop the bickering. I have to pause right here. Can you imagine Meghan causing so much trouble to inconvenience the Queen to have to drop what she was doing to go out and sort them? Just when you think you can't hate this woman anymore, you hear things like this, and it's possible. It truly is possible. But perhaps it is unfair to expect William and Harry's wives to become friends. I agree, says a former member of staff. It is unfair, especially in the hothouse atmosphere at Kensington, where older royals resent the new arrivals because the new arrivals are more glamorous and have more power within the family. The two couples, Harry and Meghan and William and Catherine, did get on initially, but didn't actually see much of each other, despite living in close proximity. But being a royal goes to everyone's head eventually, and after a while, William and Harry would meet without their wives, in tow, to avoid rows and stony silences. If power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, the best example is perhaps found at Kensington Palace. Harry, William, and Catherine, and to a lesser extent Meghan, are treated with ridiculous levels of deference within the palace. So it's said that they are always furious and baffled when the media and others outside the hothouse don't treat them in the same way. As one irreverent member of staff put it, they forget they just happened to have been lucky. They came out of the right vagina. It's almost as if the very walls of the palace have a baleful influence on the inhabitants. Going right back to Princess Margaret and earlier, everyone who lives at the palace eventually becomes jealous and suspicious, sometimes even paranoid, about what everyone else is thinking and doing. According to one report in the satirical magazine Private Eye, the rivalry between Meghan and Catherine is very real. Catherine remains semi detached from all of it, secure in her position as a future queen and wife and mother of kings with nothing to prove. But her sister in law now realizes she will never again have the largest star on her dressing room door and that her role on the royal stage will only get smaller. The panic this induced was palpable at Kensington Palace and explains why Harry and Meghan moved to Frogmore Cottage in the grounds of Windsor Castle. They had been due to move into the apartment next to William and Catherine's, an apartment vacated by the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester precisely for that reason, and then refurbished again for Harry and Meghan. Now that apartment remains empty and unused, an expensive taxpayer-funded embarrassment that the royal family would rather keep quiet about. The move to Windsor was no doubt partly down to Meghan and Harry having a child, but also due to a desire for lives outside the shadow of more important royals. Living next door to William and Catherine was perhaps a step too far for Meghan. And as with every other royal who has ever moved into a royal apartment at Kensington or any other palace, Harry and Meghan's move to Frogmore led to the usual demand that their accommodation was simply unacceptable without major refurbishment. The taxpayer cost of refurbishing Frogmore Cottage for Harry and Meghan was £2.5 million. That Meghan was in charge of the work and that she is the dominating figure in their lives generally was revealed when Harry admitted that what Meghan wants, Meghan gets. This particular statement referred to the couple's wedding arrangements, but it is hard to believe that Meghan would be this focused and determined solely in the run-up to the wedding and not equally so when it came to the rest of their lives. But this cuts no ice with the staff at Kensington, who, according to reliable reports, began using rather unflattering nicknames for Meghan within weeks of her arrival. She is Megain, or the Duchess of Difficult, or even Di 2 or Di Light, a cruel reference to what some have seen as her desire to outshine Diana, Princess of Wales. Let me pause and interject a thought here. It's a shame that Diana is not around because she would have absolutely prevented this witch woman from getting anywhere near her son. Royal courtiers at Kensington, the same tweedy British public school ex-army aristocrats they have always been, simply did not know what to make of Meghan. After receiving a number of severe reprimands from her, they were apparently relieved when she moved to Windsor, but this relief was tempered by deep anxiety at what she might do next. When Edward Lane Fox, Harry's private secretary, resigned in 2018, the feeling was that Meghan planned to do her own PR. Always a high-risk strategy, but at least it will all happen some distance from Kensington Palace and the heir to the throne, as one former royal public relations man puts it. Some of the potential pitfalls of Meghan trying to control what is written about her and her husband were revealed when the couple denounced social media, only to then set up their own Instagram account. They had pointedly chosen not to share the Kensington Palace account. The result of having their own account was not that Meghan and Harry were suddenly able to wander peacefully along the sunlit digital uplands, but rather that they were faced with a barrage of unpleasant and sometimes downright racist messages. Back at Kensington Palace, the courtiers are running hither and thither, not knowing quite what to do, having dealt only with royals and aristocrats who share the same or very similar backgrounds. They long for the old days when someone like Meghan would not have had a chance of marrying into the royal family. As another former palace employee put it, the old, rather grand courtiers, often descended from long lines of courtiers, live on their country estates when not advising the royals, and their attitudes are basically either 18th century or a mix of 18th century and 1950s. They wish they could do to Meghan what they did to Princess Margaret in the 1950s and 1960s. But if Margaret were alive, she might well be cheering Meghan on for doing what she was never able to do. She was always a rebel, and Meghan is too, although she very cleverly ingratiates herself with Prince Charles and with the Queen, who adores her. The Queen has a soft spot for Americans after meeting Barack Obama, who she completely fell in love with, so much so that she has frequently asked her courtiers if they could arrange for him to come to Britain now he is no longer president. Let me pause for a second. After I read that last line, I'm not going to lie, I felt slight disappointment with the late Queen. Especially now, knowing how evil that man is, it's kind of disappointing. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry used personal friends associated with their favorite members club, Soho House, to try to get their message across, something that once again fills the old guard with horror but helps Meghan feel she is an independent presence, not one that is subsumed by the William and Catherine publicity machine. A former member of the Kensington Palace public relations team said, Meghan approaches all this as if she were still an actress, and, of course, being part of the British royal family does involve something very much akin to acting. She is not going to let others tell her what sort of part to play. She wants to interpret the role as she sees fit, and she is worried that people will look down on her or treat her differently because she is a divorced, mixed-race American. And there are the more reactionary elements in the royal family who do look down on her, and she knows it. This makes her overreact sometimes. She doesn't have Catherine's assured way of dealing with people. Famously, Catherine was horrified when Meghan shouted at a member of Catherine's staff. That was definitely the beginning of discussions about leaving Kensington Palace. And like many people not used to dealing with servants, Meghan overdoes the imperiousness. So on the one hand, she wants to be like Diana, a people's princess, and on the other, she wants people to stand attention when she clicks her fingers. Since Harry and Meghan's departure, you'll notice that communications from Frogmore tend to involve Harry and Meghan exclusively. Pictures of the royal couple tend to be carefully cropped to remove William and Catherine before being uploaded to Instagram. It's sad, but perhaps inevitable, and what the palace doesn't understand is that the more they deny that there is a rift, the less people will believe them. As the old adage has it, journalists can be relied on to make things up 90% of the time. But press officers and communications people can be relied on to make things up 100% of the time. The tragedy for everyone living at Kensington Palace in the modern era is that they must survive an intrusive, often unsympathetic media while being hugely sensitive to accusations that, in an aspiring meritocracy, they've done nothing to deserve their elevated status. They want to be portrayed positively, but they also want it to be on their own terms. They long more than anything for positive publicity while insisting on their right to privacy, a right that many would question given the royal family's drain on the public purse. The split between the way Meghan wants to run things and the way the old guard like to do it can be best seen in the farce that followed the birth of Harry and Meghan's son Archie in 2019. The Buckingham Palace press office insisted they would be the ones to issue a press release following the birth, but Meghan and Harry had other ideas, proceeding to announce it on their Instagram account without telling the palace. Having been upstaged, Buckingham Palace retreated into old-style pomposity. They issued an absurdly grand press release stating that the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, Lady Jane Fellows, Lady Sarah and I can't pronounce her last name, and Earl Spencer have been informed and are delighted with the news. The Duchess's mother, Doria Raglan, who is overjoyed by the arrival of her first grandchild, is with their Royal Highnesses at Frogmore Cottage. A glaring omission was that Meghan's father was not mentioned. Well, isn't that interesting? Leave in the comment section why you think the palace had left Thomas Markle Sr.'s name off of the birth announcement. This crazy conspiracy theorist mind of mine would have me thinking that this was a way to let the public know that maybe Thomas Markle Sr. is not Meghan's father. I'm just saying, especially if they wanted to get revenge back onto Meghan for pulling the stunt that she pulled with the announcement over social media on Instagram. This is just the kind of thing that Meghan was trying to escape. But the perils of escape are legion, as Ron Wilson explained. What Meghan and even Catherine don't realize is that after the first flush of excitement, being part of the royal family is a life sentence, during which you must develop a very thick skin or go under. Rather than ignoring the older members of the royal family who still live at Kensington, the younger royals should try to learn from them. They have, in many cases, weathered the media attacks and mockeries. They've accepted that they must be careful with both their behavior and their public announcements, or the hoi polley, a favorite phrase of the old guard, might once again begin asking, as Willie Hamilton once asked, what are they there for? Why are we paying for them? And if it was hard for the younger royals, it's easy to imagine how much harder it is for their staff at Kensington. In the modern era, many members of staff have been sacked for being too friendly or over-familiar. Even modern, ordinary royals like Meghan and Catherine hate their staff to get above themselves, which is why, for example, protection officers have in the past been removed for the tiniest breaches of protocol. As a journalist writing for Private Eye explained, staff have been sacked or moved on the grounds that a royal disliked their aftershave, found an unsightly mole offensive, or objected to the wearing of ties that weren't silk. One was shifted from his job for offering a sweet to a child princess in front of a parent. Friendliness is never permitted. A casual observer from the late 17th century would certainly recognize Kensington Palace today. The staterooms and the external appearance are much as they were left by Christopher Wren and William Kent. Internally, of course, the rest of the vast palace would be largely unrecognizable after an endless series of scrapings and alterations. Yet the atmosphere of the palace, the human atmosphere, even beyond the staterooms, echoes curiously from earlier epochs. The inhabitants of the palace are much as the inhabitants have always been, intoxicated to a greater or lesser degree by their extraordinarily elevated status, fearful of criticism and desperate for praise, obsessed with, and to some extent embarrassed by, the social divisions between lower staff, grand staff, and residents. These distinctions, though superficially eased, are ultimately as rigid as they were centuries ago. Meghan and Harry's moves from Kensington Palace to Windsor, then to Canada, and then to a vast mansion in Montecito, California, speak volumes about a couple who have yet to realize that living in a particular place is not necessarily going to make you happy. Having furiously denied that leaving Kensington had anything to do with a family rift, a huge row, in fact, between Harry and his brother William, the couple departed for Windsor and Frogmore Cottage, despite the fact that they were already living in a delightful house in the grounds of Kensington Palace, and despite the fact that a magnificent 20-room apartment was being prepared for them in the palace itself. The search for an ideal place to live is symptomatic of a profound difference between Meghan and Harry, a difference that lies dormant while love and passion have the upper hand. Born into the royal family, Harry has never known anything outside the royal bubble. He is not ambitious or driven, for there was never a need for either of these qualities. He has the laid-back, diffident attitude of all senior royal males who have always accepted as their due the deference and respect of those around them. Having lived inside the bubble for so long, Harry thinks that life outside will be a breath of freedom and fresh air. But as his great-great-uncle Edward VIII discovered after abdicating, the grass for members of the royal family is not always greener on the other side. Harry has been famous from birth. He does not have to struggle to find his place in the world because it has been given to him, and he has been trained from birth to accept it. Meghan, on the other hand, was not born famous or specially privileged. Her fierce ambition, combined with startling good looks, beg to differ on that one, and some acting ability, led to a reasonably successful career in television. When she met Harry, her drive and ambition, and the fact that, according to insiders, she made all the running, entranced a young man who by nature and upbringing was waiting to be led. It is not true to say that he is a weak character, though some have claimed this. It is more that, like many men who lose their mothers early in life, he is drawn to strong women. He is not leadership material. Meghan is. Okay. After the initial glamour of being a senior royal in London wore off, according to her friends, Meghan was horrified at the thought that she might spend the rest of her life being driven from Kensington Palace to various official functions, to charity lunches, to hospital opening ceremonies, to dreary summers at Balmoral and Christmases at Sandringham. This prospect appalled her. She saw it as a kind of prison. Several of Harry's former girlfriends are known to have been careful to avoid reaching the point in the relationship at which marriage and imprisonment within the royal family became a probability, or in some cases, even a possibility. They knew that, though gilded, the cage they were being offered was just that, a cage. Coming from America, Meghan saw only the gilding. She failed to spot the cage until it was too late. In An African Journey, the documentary covering the couple's 2019 tour of Africa, Meghan herself admitted that she was naive about the implications of joining the royal family and facing the British tabloids, despite warnings from British friends. And it's certainly true that the British press, especially the tabloids, treated her in ways that must have seemed baffling, 1 minute flattering, the next vindictive, and even cruel. The difficulty is that there is no legal definition of what is fair or unfair, and much of the reporting about Meghan was actually just opinion, and opinion has little to do with fairness. But for a woman of Meghan's self-assurance, the solution was straightforward. Her controversial suggestion was that she and Harry would be working royals for part of the year and live in America and do other, more commercial things the rest of the year. Completely misjudging how the royal family works as an institution, Meghan was astonished to find that she and Harry would have to make a decision to be either fully in or fully out. They had to be full-time working royals or, effectively, ex-royals. Part-time royalty at taxpayers' expense was not an option. According to a former PR specialist at Kensington Palace, Meghan was also baffled and furious when the Queen vetoed the idea that the couple could set up a business in Canada under the name Sussex Royal. For Meghan, the royal family is simply a brand, and as a member of the family, she believes the brand is hers to use as she sees fit. However, the royal family is not just a brand, and the British establishment's traditional proprieties were always going to conflict with Meghan's belief that she can have all the benefits of being a member of the royal family with none of the disadvantages. There are historical precedents for this vast failure to understand how the royal family works. The Queen loves Americans and America. She famously adores the Obamas, but deep in her psyche lies the memory of her Uncle David, later Edward VIII, and fairly or not, she retains a profound sense that an American, in the shape of Mrs. Simpson, led Edward VIII away from his duty into a fantasy existence which turned out to be a lonely, useless life of increasingly bitter exile. She does not want Harry to find himself a lost soul in the same way. And no intelligent commentator can have failed to notice that all the talk of moves from Kensington to Canada, from Canada to Los Angeles, it all centers on Meghan and not Harry. And do Harry and Meghan share the same views on everything from social justice and racism to the Sussex royal brand? However much we try to disguise the fact, it is clear that Meghan runs the show. Harry admitted as much when he said that what Meghan wants, Meghan gets. When Meghan and Harry fell out with William and Catherine and the whole royal machine, sources close to the Queen were heard mumbling about the deep significance of Harry's off-the-cuff phrase. The burden of what they were saying was that if Meghan, like Mrs. Simpson, gets what she wants, then look out. We mustn't forget history in case we are condemned to repeat it, said one. It is clear that Meghan's greatest difficulty in the UK is the press. She prefers the more deferential media in her home country, who do not have the complex relationship with the royal family and their partners that the British media do. This is a major reason for the move back to the United States. But we should remember that the press in the UK has always adored Harry. The newspapers might have done some moralizing in the days when he fell rather than walked out of the nightclubs, but there is something innocent and unassuming about him that leads to most positive coverage, not to mention the deep underlying sympathy, even among hard-bitten hacks, for a man whose mother died in terrible circumstances when he was only 12. A palace insider was once quoted as saying about Harry, "The first strong-willed girl who comes along will make mincemeat of him." The British press, and especially the tabloid press, has not been so kind to Meghan. Even her worst enemy would agree that much of the coverage of Meghan has been unpleasant and unnecessary, and it might be argued that the papers would have sold just as well as if they continued to sing Meghan's praises. But the true test of character and fitness to be part of the royal family is whether or not you can put up with criticism, however unfair it may seem. A former editor of Private Eye once said that if you sue when someone writes something nasty about you, the story never goes away. Old errors and long-forgotten mistakes are dredged up to blacken your character. The legal case and the behavior that gave rise to it are discussed endlessly as the lawyers battle it out. If, on the other hand, you ignore the story, it is forgotten within days. It seems that Harry and Meghan have overlooked the fact that the aim of the press and the media is always to get two bites of the cherry. First, the celebrity, royal or otherwise, is lauded and praised. Then, when the press runs out of material, the process of criticism and sometimes condemnation begins. When Meghan and Harry moved to the United States, it was to what has been described as their dream family home. They have a Californian mansion that covers 18,000 square feet. Just enough for 2 adults and a baby, as one insider put it. The house includes 9 bedrooms and 16 bathrooms. They have celebrities for neighbors, Orlando Bloom and Katy Perry, among others. And Meghan, at least, will feel she is safe among equals, among people who understand her and will give her space. According to a friend who asked not to be named, the reason the couple bought the house in Montecito centered on the fact that it has a gym, a cinema, a games room, a sauna, a library, a children's cottage in the 5.4-acre grounds for Archie, a tennis court, and a swimming pool. In other words, it has enough to keep Harry occupied and reduces the need for him to risk his security by going outside. The size of the Montecito house might also be interpreted as Meghan and Harry putting 2 middle fingers up to the royal family. At Kensington, trips outside the palace had to be made with security staff, and this hardly lessened the couple's sense that they were imprisoned. In California, their house is so big that they can have far more freedom than was ever possible at Kensington or Frogmore, and without much of a security risk. But if Kensington was a gilded cage, Montecito is too. It's just much bigger. Harry still can't leave the grounds alone without security. Veteran royal photographer Arthur Edwards, who has always been popular with the royal family, has publicly stated that he feels Harry is unhappy. Edwards says you can see this whenever Harry appears in front of the cameras. Some may agree, others will disagree, but few can dispute that Harry showed no interest in leaving the royal family before his marriage. No doubt the compromise he sought, being a part-time royal, was seen as a way to avoid hurting the Queen while keeping Meghan happy. He was clearly upset that this idea was rejected by the Queen. Arthur Edwards' claim that Harry has looked miserable ever since Meghan appeared on the scene may be going too far, but her search for happiness has certainly created turmoil. And even Meghan might have to admit that it was an error of judgment to announce, before consulting the Queen, that she and Harry were no longer going to be full-time working royals. Likewise, criticizing the Queen for stripping Harry of his military appointments was bound to get Meghan into hot water. Allegedly, at the time, Meghan said, "The powers of the monarchy are, unfortunately, greater than me." The couple's spat with the royal family was far more serious than we were perhaps led to believe in the early part of 2019. But those subtle signals were always there. The Queen's 2019 Christmas message included a photograph of the Cambridges in the background, with no sign of Meghan and Harry, for instance. And if Meghan really is the driving force behind the couple's first move to Frogmore, then Canada, and finally California, it might be that the world is not entirely blind. It might be that the world is actually rather good at interpreting the subtle and not so subtle clues in a manner that is entirely reasonable. Meghan and Harry would do much better to learn from the Queen, who is widely admired for her policy of never complain, never explain, and accept that the best way to stop the papers writing unkind things is simply not to fret over it when they do. Just wait for them to get bored and move on. It has worked wonderfully well for the Queen for more than half a century. The couple's desire to earn their own living might seem laudable, and their £112 million deal with the film streaming company Netflix shows that even without the Sussex royal brand, they are rapidly heading towards being, well, a brand. But as Arthur Edwards has argued, however much Meghan may enjoy such things, Harry will hate appearing on Oprah Winfrey and other TV chat shows. He will hate trying to do voiceovers for various worthy films. He's not a natural performer. Are we really being asked to believe that he pushed hard for that deal with Netflix? Does he really want to be in showbiz, or does the couple's move in the direction have far more to do with Meghan getting what Meghan wants? Left to his own devices, would Harry really have announced that he wanted to make documentaries that inform but also give hope? The phrase has a sanctimonious air quite alien to what we know of Harry's character. Meghan and Harry suffer acutely from a problem that afflicts all wealthy people who wish to do good. They're always in danger of being criticized for giving advice to the world's poorest and most disadvantaged from a position of great wealth and privilege. However you dress it up, it does not look good, ever. Criticism from across the world would no doubt cease if Meghan announced that the fortune she shares with her husband meant that they were able to work full-time and unpaid for a number of charities here in the United States. But whether the couple will move again, whether their marriage will last, whether their critics are wrong, only time will tell. And we would do well to remember that the only prediction about the future that can be relied on is that all predictions about the future are liable to be wrong. Some royal couples survive the pressures of the press and the royal establishment, while for others, perhaps most famously Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend, it is all too much and the result is the end of the relationship. A former employee who worked for Meghan and Harry during their time at Kensington Palace tried to describe the relationship between the couple. She paraphrased a line from George Bernard Shaw. She said, "Just remember that in all relationships, but in this one especially, one kisses and one allows the kiss. And who knows, things change over time and often have a tendency to come full circle." When the marriage of Meghan and Harry no longer excites the tabloids and the feeding frenzy has moved to some other celebrity couple, London, and specifically Kensington Palace, may not seem such a bad place to live after all. The fact that Meghan and Harry wanted to take some part of their current world with them, demonstrated by their denied wish to continue as part-time royals, speaks volumes about the difficulties of shaking off the past and embracing an entirely uncertain future. They may find fulfillment and happiness beyond the bounds of Kensington Palace, and a few would begrudge them that. But the history of royals in exile suggests it will not be easy. The Queen was right. Meghan is pure evil. And Meghan, no doubt, is going to go down in history as Meghan, probably being nicknamed Meghan the Terrible. Now, it'd be interesting to see what these royal biographers are going to say now, because a lot of this stuff, no doubt, has to be updated. Nobody saw back in 2021 what was going to unfold. And here we are. So it'd be curious to know if this book that Tom Quinn is going to put out, yes, ma'am, will update some of the things that he said about Meghan this first go around, because it does feel like this is going to be a similar type of book. But, it's interesting that all these biographers had been saying the same thing about Meghan, how Meghan is tough and how she's independent and she's a self-starter. And after watching her over the past 8 years now, she's anything but. I think she's the dumbest woman on the planet, as well as a very weak woman. She doesn't represent women for anything. Nothing. All this woman did was sleep her way to the top and entrap a prince who she preyed on because he had known vulnerabilities and she knew how to prey on that. This woman, hands down, is a predator but offers nothing back to society. Nothing. And I think, just like Kamala, whoever planted these women in there miscalculated. Nobody really knows what the real deal is with Meghan, but the consistent theme across the board, across all royal biographers, is that Meghan is just a terrible human being. The same story and pattern of how she treated other people, is an indicator that this woman is a shit person, a shit human being. Unfortunately, we're nowhere near the end of this story. And I foresee many more books being written about the story of this couple, a story that is nowhere near close to the story that we were told in the beginning. Nowhere near. That I promise you. Based off of what we're seeing coming out, I guarantee that this story is going to change dramatically different if the day comes that these two have to be held accountable for their actions, especially in a court of law. Wait for it, folks. It's not over. But what do you guys think? Did you know some of this stuff that was mentioned here? I mean, I didn't catch it because back then I really wasn't paying attention to what the royal biographers were saying. And remember, in 2021, the United States was pretty much closed off from the news that was going on in the UK. Really, it was until the Oprah interview. And then people started scratching their heads saying, well, wait a minute. But as you can see here, how people felt back then, Meghan was horrible. Anyway, let me know what you think below. As always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Such a fraud.